Sup? So usually on this channel I try to keep it more towards racing games and cars. That's kind of the main thing about this channel. I very rarely talk about games that I play in my private time, although this is kind of what the channel was supposed to be. So I'm gonna bring it back to that initial idea for this video. So over the last couple of weeks, I've been kind of getting into the Mafia games, especially considering there's a new game that has now come out. And I only ever played the first Mafia game, the remake of it, that is. I haven't ever played Mafia 2 and 3. And in this video, I kind of wanted to talk about the last one in this initial trilogy, Mafia 3. So this game was mostly disliked by fans, I would say, or at the very best had a fairly mixed reception when it came out. It's just that most people had some gripes with the game that I will kind of get into later. However, I could not share that same experience. Like, I actually really enjoyed the game for various reasons. In fact, I would say I enjoyed it just as much, if not more, than the other games that I played in the series prior. And I think all of that really comes down to the game favoring a different kind of playstyle that I think most people didn't really expect going into this one. Expectations is really like the big keyword here. I think a lot of people had very different expectations when it came to this game. So I'm gonna break this kind of like casual review down into like several areas. So let's talk about the gameplay first. Mafia 3 is definitely a lot more gameplay focused than the previous games. I feel like in the previous games, the gameplay was just kind of like a supplement to kind of connect the story together. Whereas I feel like in Mafia 3, it really is the center point of the entire game. And sure enough, the moment-to-moment gameplay is genuinely excellent. So let's talk about the guns first, since obviously how the guns feel has a big impact on the entire rest of the game. And I gotta say I don't want to say like a GTA clone, because that's not really what it is, but you get what I'm trying to say here. For these open world crime games where you can go on foot and, you know, drive cars at the same time, I feel like amongst all of these games, I feel like this game has some of the best feeling guns out of all of them. They feel heavy, they have a lot of recoil, they sound great. Each gun genuinely feels extremely fun. I'm gonna draw a lot of comparisons to GTA 5 in this video, which I feel like is a little bit unfair because it's obviously a very different kind of game, but at the same time it came out 3 years after GTA 5, and I think it also kind of messed with the expectations that people had in Mafia 3. And I gotta be honest, just directly comparing how the guns feel in Mafia 3 compared to GTA 5, the guns feel a million times better in Mafia 3. I feel like that's like one of my own personal gripes with GTA 5 is just that the guns in that game feel kind of like toys, if I'm being honest. Especially compared to the previous game, GTA 4. I feel like the guns never really felt very impactful. And in Mafia 3, that is a million times better. As I said, like every gun has insane amounts of recoil, at least in the beginning before you start to upgrade your character. And they sound great. Like they genuinely feel heavy and impactful as they should. The shotguns in particular are probably the best example for this. I really enjoyed using the shotguns, although the shotguns in this game, just like in any other game they appear in, have this issue where they only are effective at a really, really short range, which isn't really realistic. But shotguns in particular felt really great, but so did all of the other weapons. But just as important as how the guns feel, obviously the hit feedback is just as important, because it has a direct impact on how the gunplay feels, and it's really, really good. And I think a massive reason why that is because the game doesn't actually use traditional ragdolls when you shoot someone, but baked in animations that feel really, really impactful. Like the enemies really recoil when you hit them and fall, you know, believably down to the ground when they die. It's just that the hit feedback is really, really good with these guns. And that is paired with I want to say actually pretty much flawless cover system, which really surprised me. So in a lot of these games you can just press a button to take cover somewhere, either behind a wall or behind like some kind of like smaller object. And the thing is, since this is an open world game, in most of these open world games, this cover system doesn't always work 100% well. So GTA 5 is guilty of that, the Watch Dogs games are guilty of that, pretty much any game that you can come up with. In all of these games, the cover system always kinda has its moments, so to say, where it doesn't really do what you want it to do. So your character might move someplace else where you didn't really intend to go, or it just doesn't work altogether. Not in Mafia 3. I don't know what they did, but it feels like some wizardry where the cover system just works. Like if I wanted to put the character into positions where I was 100% sure there's no way he's going to be able to take cover because the cover is too small and the angle is kind of awkward, there's just not enough space, every single time it just worked. which it's so genuine wizardry, but the cover system works flawlessly in this game. And on top of that, you have really, really good movement. So I feel like movement in these kinds of games is always a bit tricky because you want the character to feel very agile and movable, but at the same time, you know, you're playing a grown-ass man. Like, he has to feel kind of, well, not heavy, but weighty, I guess is the right thing to say here. And so you have, for example, you know, Red Dead Redemption 2 goes all in on the weighty feeling. Like, Arthur Morgan is not agile in that game whatsoever. And I feel like with Mafia 3, they managed to strike a perfect balance where running and stuff, like, it feels fast. Like, you can move around really quickly. Like, climbing and stuff, it all feels fast, but still weighty enough to feel authentic. Does that make sense? So I think the best example is when, let's say, for example, you're aiming and then you go out of the aim and want to start running. Your character has this kind of like start step animation. It's hard to put into words. Maybe I'll put in some footage here to illustrate what I mean. But it just feels great. Like the movement, the cover system, the shooting, and all the impact that it has, it all feels genuinely great, and is among some of the best I have seen in this genre. But obviously, you're not going to be spending all the game on foot. You're going to be spending a lot of it in a car as well. And once again, like, I gotta be honest, like, this is some of the best car handling that these kinds of open world action games have had. So I think a fair comparison here would be the Watch Dogs games, because the handling in the Watch Dogs games is actually made by the same people who made the Driver games, which had an amazing handling model. So it's kind of weird that the Watch Dogs games, the cars just feel fake. It's hard to put into words. It's something that I think you really only get if you've played it yourself. But the physics and the handling, all of it feels very fake in that game. But in Mafia 3, the cars feel genuinely great. So since it's obviously a period piece and it plays in like the 1950s, you're mostly going to be driving older cars, particularly older muscle cars. And they feel exactly as they should. They feel weighty, they feel heavy, but they're still fast. You can still drift, you can still get into a slide with them. It just feels authentic. I think authenticity is really what makes the handling and the cars in this game feel as good as they are. I think they can genuinely keep up with some actual racing games. In fact, I would say the handling in this game is better than some genuine racing games that I've played. And the cool thing is that you can actually decide how you want the handling to be. So in the menu, there's actually a toggle, so to say, for whether or not you want to have a more simplified normal handling or a simulation handling. And I mostly played on the simulation handling because I genuinely felt it was more fun and even more authentic. So with the simulation handling, the cars definitely slide a lot more. I think there's some traction control if you play on the regular handling. That is not there anymore, and the cars properly get into slides and burnouts. But also the ABS is removed, which is really funny, especially during car chases where you kind of forget that the cars have no ABS. So yeah, like honestly, in terms of vehicle handling model, this is like among some of the best I've seen in this kind of like genre of games, so to say. So I hope all of this illustrates that the moment-to-moment core gameplay is like extremely polished and really well done. But that's obviously not what most people have an issue with this game. The biggest critique point towards this game is the repetition. It's just that the game presents you with the same kind of mission structure over and over and over again, where you have to do some kind of objectives in the open world, and it just reappears over and over and over again. And I'm not gonna argue too much with that, but what I will say is that this game is only as repetitive as you make it to be. At least that was my experience. So for one, for example, you have a genuinely massive arsenal of weapons. So at any point you can just call in some like guy who arrives in like a weapons truck, and you can select a different weapon at any time. You don't even have to go to like any specific place for this. You can just call this dude up and switch weapons even mid-fight if you want to. And there is so much. Like obviously you have your very average like assault rifles and pistols and shotguns, but all of these feel very different, and there's also very different types within these weapon categories, and there's also special weapons as well that you can try to use. And all of those feel different, and all of those serve different purposes. And I think the mistake that most people made is that they just stuck to one weapon and then they just never switched it out, and that's why it felt repetitive. Which I don't think is the way the game is supposed to be played, because like especially in the beginning of the game, you cannot carry all that much ammo. I think you have maybe like 3 magazines worth of ammo at any given time, which is not a lot. And in a lot of firefights early on in the game, you will run out of ammo. And when that happens, you actually have to like kind of like scrounge around and try to find like some guy you just shot to take their weapon and then continue from there. And I actually think that's when the gameplay works the best, is when you are very, very limited on ammo and you just kind of have to think on your feet, try to find a weapon somewhere that you can switch to. I think that's when the gameplay actually worked the best. And as you start to upgrade the character, you also start to kind of like increase your ammo size, the amount of ammo you can carry at any given time. And that's when it doesn't really make much sense to switch to other weapons anymore, because there are some that are just kind of better than most of the other ones. And you can stick to those for entire set pieces, because you'll have more than enough ammo. So I would actually recommend, if you play this game, don't upgrade your ammo count. Actually try to keep it limited, and then switch weapons as you see fit whenever you find any on the ground while you're in a firefight. But other than weapons, you also get to unlock various gadgets. So in the beginning, you have very basic stuff like your usual grenades or Molotov cocktails. But then there's other stuff that in the beginning I thought was kind of useless. But I think the idea is that you are supposed to experiment with these gadgets. So for example, like one easy example I have is mines. So you can place down mines at any point, and then obviously if someone gets close to them, they explode. Now initially I thought this was super useless, because why would you use them if you can just, I don't know, stealth your way through, or like you obviously don't know the paths all of these NPCs are gonna take. So I felt that, having these mines was kind of useless, until I started to kind of experiment while I was in a car chase, and I looked at the mines and realized I can drop those off the car. So I can drop those behind me while I'm driving, and those actually then made for a great way to break up car chases, because you can just drop those mines mid-drive, and then anyone that, because obviously cars are always trying to follow you, like they're always like right behind you for the most part. They will inevitably drive over the mines and then just explode. And I think those made for like really, really effective chase breakers, more so than regular shooting or grenades that will for the most part miss. So I think what the game is trying to get you to do is to just experiment and try to use the different gadgets in different circumstances. And you'll find out that if you do that enough, you'll eventually run into situations where you realize like, hey, this gadget or this weapon isn't as useless as I thought it was, because it has like a very specific use case. Like best case, the mines that I mentioned earlier. Now, throughout the game, you're going to be met with different objectives. So for the most part, I think the most common objective is like that you have to go to a place and kill a dude. Now, that's always usually fairly easy, and if you are annoyed with the repetition in the game, especially later on in the game, there is a way to just basically circumvent that entirely. So later on in the game, especially if you played some of the DLCs, you unlock a sniper, so to say. So the way it works is basically like you can kind of see the area of effect that the sniper will have, and you can just kind of get close to the guy that needs to kill, and then just have the sniper do his work and then go out, and then that's the objective done in like 5 seconds. However, it's not always that easy. Like other times you have to infiltrate a place and interrogate someone. Other times you have to go to a place and destroy something. Now a lot of times this kind of like boils down to like going to a specific place and then holding a button. But I feel like these different objectives usually lend themselves to different approaches. So it is possible to just go in loud and guns blazing every single time you have to do anything. But I feel like oftentimes it's actually smarter and safer to actually do stealthing, which is possible in this game. And also feels really, really good, because the animations are extremely brutal when you take someone out, and they look crazy good. But let's say, for example, you have to steal a car somewhere. If you go in guns blazing, there's a very real chance that the car will get blown up, especially if you try to take cover behind it. So in those instances, I felt like it's actually much easier to just kind of try to stealth my way to the car and then just get in and leave. That worked way more effectively than just going in guns blazing. I think a lot of people missed that. I think a lot of people either just always went in guns blazing and just never even attempted stealth, or really thought about their approach. Like, okay, what is it that I actually need to do, and what approach makes the most sense here? And this becomes even more obvious when you consider that you infiltrate all kinds of locations in this game. So you might be infiltrating clubs or shipyards. At one point, you even had to infiltrate like some kind of like grocery store, which was kind of goofy. And not only do these different locations keep things fresh, because you're always like in different areas, which at times could be exteriors or interiors, could be more narrow with low visibility, or could be more open with a lot of visibility, where stealthing is a little bit more difficult. So it keeps things fresh, but it also, once again, makes these different approaches either more or less effective. And you kind of have to consider where you are at the moment, what you're supposed to do, and what makes the most sense for any given objective. And that's why I think overall I didn't really feel the repetition as much, because I paid more attention to the locales, and I paid more attention to the approaches. I used more of the weapons arsenal. I tried to experiment. And I think if you do that, the repetitive nature of the game doesn't really become as apparent as for most people, I think. And now along with that, you also have a very satisfying progression, which I feel like is also fairly rare with these kinds of games. It's not like on the level of a full-fledged RPG, but there's some nice character growth. You grow stronger, you unlock more abilities, you unlock more perks over time, and also like taking over the map is really satisfying. It really reminded me of Need for Speed Carbon, how you slowly but surely take over like complete all of these races, and then piece by piece take over the districts. Mafia 3 has this kind of same progression in a way, and it feels just as satisfying here, if I'm being honest. But yeah, for the most part, you're doing open world objectives. That's what the bulk of the gameplay is. You're driving around or walking around in the open world and doing these like objectives. And the good thing is with that if you actually do unlock a story mission where you're in a certain set piece with like some story and your new areas, it actually feels special because you've been doing all these things so that the story missions actually feel way more memorable and rewarding, because it feels like you're doing something special now, Now what I will say though, and this is where I will 100% agree with people's criticism, the optional missions, like all of the side quests in the game, those are incredibly repetitive, because most of them really boil down to just driving all the way down to the bayou, which is in the very south of the map, and stealing some slow car, either a semi-truck or a van or something of that kind, but something really, really slow, and then having to drive that car all the way to the northern part of the map to some of the districts you've taken over, and you have to do that a bunch of times. That is actually not interesting, and there's not really any real different approaches you can take with this, especially because for the most part you are just driving these like really, really slow cars down the same roads up to the northern parts of the map. I think the optional missions are very skippable, especially because I don't think they gave you any tangible rewards either. And I think this is where I would definitely agree with most people. Those are just really repetitive and they don't offer much value. So if you want to play the game, or if you thought about returning to the game, I would actually recommend to just skip those outright. Another problem where I can definitely see the repetition being a bit of a problem is with the lack of enemy types. So I know this is kind of like difficult to do because they always want the game to be a little bit more authentic. But yeah, for the most part, you just have your regular goons with the same exact HP. Those make up 99% of the enemies. Occasionally you run into people with shotguns who will try to slowly approach you with the shotguns, and if they get close they do a lot of damage. Other times you might have snipers, although those are really, really rare. But I think the lack of actual like tangible enemy types definitely also makes the game a little bit more repetitive. I think had the developers been a little bit more creative with this, it could have leveraged some of that a little bit. Like for example, maybe like certain enemies that you can't stealthily take down, or like assassins, or other enemies that have like a lot of armor that are really hard to take down with regular weapons, so you have to kind of get close and do melee. Something of that kind. You're not really gonna see any of those kind of enemies in this game. It's mostly just like regular goons. So yeah. And lastly, I thought the collectibles were kind of lacking, but I mean, it's collectibles, who cares? However, that brings me to the next point, which is the map. And I gotta be honest, like the map is definitely, I think, one of the bigger highlights of this game, because it really puts quality over quantity. So the map is fairly small. It's not like anywhere near the size of like a GTA 5 or anything of that sort. It's much more small and much more condensed. However, it makes up for that with loads of interiors, which I'm also kind of mixed on, because in most interiors there's really not much to do. However, they exist, and I think the interiors are mostly used for these open world objectives. But what the map really does well is that it represents the era the game plays in pretty much perfectly. So keep in mind, this game I think plays like somewhere in the 50s. I forgot the exact year that they went for, but it really represents that era perfectly, because obviously you're playing as a colored main character, and obviously racism was a big problem in the 50s in America, and so racism is pretty much everywhere in this game. So people will yell the N-word at you on the street if you're just walking, or will just kind of look at you, or do some kind of like funny comment. However, I will say that depends also what area in the game you're in. So if you're in some of the more posh areas, you will actually get more comments thrown your way than in some of the other areas, which is a really, really cool detail. But also there's like some stores in the game where there's like a specific like sign that says no colored people allowed, and if you try to go in, the store owner will just tell you to get out, or he will call the police, or maybe even attack you outright. And I think all of this like really makes the era and the map itself feel really, really lived in and very real in a way that I've rarely ever seen in games like this. It also really helps that the map feels very alive. There's lots of traffic, lots of pedestrians, and all of the areas feel very distinct as well. Where I think in particular, I think the French Ward is probably the coolest, most memorable area of the game. And most importantly, the main city actually makes up the most of the map. Like the main portion of the map is the city, which is something I didn't like about GTA 5, which like Los Santos was great as a city, but most of the map was just like fairly boring. Like the Blaine County area makes up most of the map is. And it's just not interesting. It's fairly boring. Whereas I feel like in Mafia 3, they realized that the city is obviously the place you want to spend most of your time in. So it makes sense that it takes up the most of the map. So further down the south, you have the Bayou area, which is okay, is fine, but it's really not as big as the city. And I think it's nice that the city is the main focus here. I know this doesn't really have much to do with the map, which was kind of the environment, which was kind of like the topic of this part of the video. But the soundtrack needs an honorable mention for just how unbelievably good it is. Like the soundtrack is, I'm not usually someone for like oldies, like old school music from this era. It's not something that I really listen to. Like it's fine, I never had an issue with it. But this game 100% sold me on this music. Not only is the combat music really good as well. Like it's also something I think people didn't even mention when it comes to the soundtrack. But the combat music is really good. But the radio is definitely what steals the show here. Like the radio, there's only I think 3 radio stations, but they all have bangers. Like they're all full of bangers. I think the moment where this really clicked for me was when I was driving around in some kind of like Dodge Charger type car, and Born to Be Wild started to play on the radio, and I was drifting through all the corners. That's when it really hit me, and I was like, man, this game is a vibe. This game is such a vibe, and the soundtrack and how good it is really added to that. Like low-key, this game kind of sold me on this entire genre of like oldie music, to the point where I'm now listening to some of the songs from the game in the gym and stuff. Like it's so good actually. Now the story is also another part of the game, and with the story, I'm not sure how much I have to say about this, because Mafia 2's story, I think, overall was definitely better. Mainly because Mafia 2's story felt a little bit more personal, because in that game, you know, you played as Vito, and you kind of, like, follow him through various parts of his life. The problem I had with Mafia 2's story, unfortunately, was that it felt very rushed, and a lot of characters didn't really get enough screen time for me to care about them. Like, some characters really, like, appeared maybe once before disappearing for most of the game, and then the next time you see them, you basically have to either kill them or they die. So that was kind of the problem I had with Mafia 2. And I want to say with Mafia 3, this is definitely better. It feels definitely a little bit more focused. The cast of characters is a little bit more condensed, but therefore it gives all of the characters way more time to shine. Overall, it's your very classic revenge story. And I gotta be honest, if you enjoyed the Punisher series, the TV show The Punisher, which I enjoyed a lot, by the way. I'm still upset that show got cancelled. But if you enjoyed that one, you're gonna absolutely love the story, because that is like pretty much the best Punisher type story I've ever seen in a game like this. However, I think when it comes to the story, I think the characters are really what carry it, and is really what makes the story what it is. And in particular, I gotta be honest, Donovan steals the show. Donovan is such an unbelievably entertaining character. He steals the show in every single cutscene he is in. He is so funny. He has so much charisma. And it's just one of the most fun characters I've ever seen in a game like this. And every single time I always wanted more Donovan. I was always happy when he appeared in some cutscene, because I always knew it's gonna be entertaining as hell. And like, I think to this day, I think he's definitely my favorite character throughout honestly the entire Mafia franchise, if I'm being honest. Super fun. But I also want to give an honorable mention to Father James, who's kind of like constantly like represents a conflict of interest with the main character players, who I'll also talk about. Father James is really like a character that I felt really bad for throughout a lot of parts of the game. And I think with both Donovan and Father James, what makes them so good is the acting and how they're portrayed, and the lines that they say. They are written extremely well, and I think Father James in particular has some of the most memorable lines throughout the entire game. Like, that really makes you think like, damn, man. Like, damn, dude. But what about the main characters? So you play as Lincoln Clay, who is basically a war veteran, so to say, who just came back from some kind of like war. I forgot the specifics of it. And I gotta be honest, like, I don't feel as strongly towards him as with Vito from Mafia 2, because as I said earlier, Vito you really follow throughout all of his life, all his ups and downs, whereas with Lincoln you just kind of get like thrown right in. However, I think Lincoln, just like with Donovan and Father James, and pretty much all the other characters in this game really, is really carried by his performance. So, or rather the actor's performance and portrayal of this character. So Lincoln just has so much charisma, and he's just like, he's just the super confident guy that makes you feel like a badass when you play as him. And I think that was really the point. I don't think the point was to make a character that you feel for, or like, you know, just kind of like get invested in his like life story. They just wanted to have you play as a main character that makes you feel like a badass. And I think with Lincoln, they absolutely succeeded in that goal. I think only when it comes to the antagonists, I feel a little bit meh over. I feel like the antagonists in general, they don't really have as much screen time, and they feel a little bit underdeveloped, other than like the big main antagonists of the game. So yeah, with those I was just kind of whatever. Same also goes for the side characters. So you have 3 underbosses in this game, 3 main side characters that are kind of like your companions throughout the game. One of them is actually Vito, the main character from the previous game, and I gotta be honest, Vito is cool in this game. It feels like he has even more charisma than the previous game. But the other ones, namely Burke and Cassandra is what they're called. For the most part, they're kind of annoying, especially Cassandra. Burke I kind of liked, mainly because he was Irish. But yeah, Cassandra was just really annoying. And I think the reason why this is because for the sake of tension and drama, which I don't know, like with those I was just kind of like whatever. But they don't really appear too much throughout the main story anyway, so it's fine. I'm gonna be talking about the ending of the game now, so if you don't want to get spoiled on the ending and how the story wraps up, you can just skip to the next section of the video, which is gonna be DLC. So, there are different endings in this game you can choose depending on who you assigned the districts to, which I will already say is really cool, that the gameplay actually has some direct consequence on the story. So in a lot of games, it's just like the final choice that determines what ending you get. In this game, it actually like really matters who you assign these districts to. Like if you give everything to Vito, or if you spread everything more, you know, evenly, it actually has a direct impact on the ending that you get. However, I think between all of the endings, I think the one that feels most canon to me and makes the most logical sense to me, and is also the reason why I went for it, is the Rule Together ending, where basically you, together with all of your associates, all of the underbosses that you recruited, they're all still alive. No one, you didn't have to kill anyone, and you just rule together with everyone to just kind of like take over the criminal underbelly of the United States. The reason why I feel like that one makes the most sense is because throughout all of these really cool documentary type cutscenes you've seen throughout the game, it's always hinted at that Lincoln built up this criminal empire. Obviously that doesn't make any sense if you leave at the end of the game, or you get killed at the end of the game, which also is a possibility. This only makes sense if you really like, you know, go for the ending where you really, with all of the underbosses together, you start to spread out to other cities and take over America, or rather America's crime business. It also makes more sense because there's obviously rising tensions between Lincoln and Father James throughout most of the game, where it feels like James always wants Lincoln to stop and stop and stop, but Lincoln wants to push and push and push. And at the end, you know, in one of the final cutscenes, this kind of has like this really boils over to like a breaking point where James is like, look, if you want to keep going, you'll never hear from me again. And it just feels like, you know, Lincoln wanting to keep pushing makes more sense, considering this kind of like conflict, you know, rose over time, and this is now the breaking point, so to say. It also just feels like this Rule Together ending is Lincoln's own path. It's the path that he chose. So for example, Donovan wants you to kill all of the underbosses and associates you have at this point, and just rule alone. And James' wish is for you to just leave the city and everything behind, and just live a normal life. And I feel like ruling together with the underbosses goes against both of their wishes, and in return is Lincoln's own path. It's the path that he forges for himself. So it feels like this ending makes the most sense, and if I had to choose an ending that feels canon, it's probably this one. And the reason why I like all of the endings despite everything though is because there's no definitive best ending. There's no happiest ending. I think there's like an argument to be made for Vito ruling over the city after you leave. But even despite that though, there's no happy ending in any of these, and this is something that I really like, is that there's no best ending. Every ending has some kind of trade-off. Even in the ending that I chose to be, you know, my ending and I consider canon, in the end it's said that Lincoln lost himself to drugs and alcohol, you know, and that obviously sucks. I like that, you know, I like that there's no ending that feels perfect, because it's a crime game, you know, like it's a crime game that plays in like a really, really dirty era of America. No ending is supposed to feel happy or perfect. So I was really satisfied with, you know, how the game wrapped up overall. And yeah, overall, I gotta be honest, I enjoyed the story. It definitely doesn't feel, as I said, like it doesn't feel as personal as Mafia 2's, but it feels less rushed. It feels like the characters in this game, other than like some of the antagonists, feel more fleshed out, and the performances with all the animations and the voice work and the writing is absolutely excellent and on par with some of the best I've seen in this genre, so to say. So, let's talk about DLCs. Everyone that just skipped the previous section, welcome back. So, there were 3 main DLCs that got released for this game, which I also just kind of briefly wanted to talk about. And my expectations for these were even lower, considering Mafia 2's DLCs were really terrible. Just flat out. They didn't add anything valuable to the game at all. However, in Mafia 3, I gotta be honest, the DLCs are on par with like some of the best story moments, if I'm being honest. So for the most part, they make as great their versions from the story grind. So if at any point you feel a little bit fatigued from like the open world objectives, you can just start the DLCs whenever and just kind of like use those to break up the story grind a little bit. And each of these adds completely new areas to go to. So none of these really utilize the map you're already using, because the developers probably realize, okay, people spent enough time on the map already. So they actually added new areas for you to go to with each of these DLCs. In fact, one of the DLCs, I think the first DLC, even adds a completely new district you can revisit on the map as well, which is even better. And all of these DLCs experiment with different themes and genres. So you have one DLC that is more rebellion, where it's like a you know, rebellion against the regime type of thing. Then another DLC is kind of like a post-war spy thriller. And then one of the DLCs, which is probably the most wacky one, is horror themed, you know, where it's about like a cult that you try to like get, you know, investigate, which is super, super interesting. So I think all of the DLCs are super enjoyable and worth playing. They all add a lot of value. They experiment with new genres and takes and themes. But most importantly, they really just do the exact thing that people wanted the game to do, which is to just cut out all of the open world stuff. So the DLCs are very straightforward, very linear, very, you know, just very, very well paced as well. So it's exactly what the fans would have preferred the entire rest of the game to be, basically. So DLCs are great in this game, 100%. And so, this leaves me with the verdict. So overall, I gotta be honest, considering the expectations that, you know, I had when going into this game is much better than I anticipated. I think the main thing to understand with this game, compared to the rest of the Mafia games, is that the story serves the gameplay in this game. Whereas in the rest of the series, the gameplay serves the story. Like, the gameplay is really the focus here, and it's really a sandbox in a lot of ways. And you are supposed to experiment and try different things, try different approaches, use your arsenal, and try to like keep things fresh as much as you can. Now, by no means do I want to say this is a masterpiece at all. It has some issues, some of them which I talked about in this video. But as far as like these GTA-like games go, I think it's great. Especially considering that this is a genre of game that has kind of died out over time. Like, we don't really get these kind of like open world crime games as much anymore. And whenever we do, for the most part, they've been pretty terrible as of late. So, for example, we had the Saints Row reboot or Watch Dogs Legion. Like, both of these games just were, at best, really, really mediocre. And I think with Mafia 3, it kind of like usually gets grouped into the same category. But I feel like really undeservedly so, as I've talked about in this video. So yeah, overall, I would definitely recommend the game. You can usually get the game for like $5 on sale these days with all the DLCs included. So if you've ever been interested in this game, or if maybe you have dropped the game in the past, I would absolutely recommend you to give it another go. Give it a chance. It's really, really good. Once again, keep everything in mind that I talked about. And yeah, I think you're gonna walk away from this with a really, really good time, I think. So, I think that covers everything that I want to talk about Mafia 3. Now, I'm not sure if I'll talk about other games that I play in my free time. I feel like this one kind of made sense because it still had cars and some racing included. So it was like vaguely related. But for the most part, I'll keep this channel more towards racing game related topics. But yeah, now I want to hear from you. Did you play Mafia 3 or were you thinking about getting it? What was your opinion when you played the game back then, if you've played it previously? And has it changed over time? Let me know in the comments below. And with that, thanks so much for listening. Appreciate it. And until next time, take care, take it easy. And as always, peace. See you guys.